Hi, my name is Abby Cole. I'm a PhD student at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I'm excited to share my research with you today. I will be presenting my paper titled Caring for Communities Using AI-MC to Challenge the Social Construction of Gender. So first, I'd like to talk about what AIMC is. It stands for AI-mediated communication, and it's the text that assists people and creates dialogue when we're using things like email or our smart devices to exchange text messages. And this is the generated automatic replies or responses that come up to complete a phrase or suggest a certain word. And my objective with this research is to analyze the role that AIMC plays in constructing social norms with language and usage. My research included searching for articles related to AIMC, human-computer relationships, and historical bias concerns with AI and language. Using the keywords gender, language, artificial intelligence, and AIMC, I compiled research articles from the fields of human-computer learning, critical media studies, and psychology to conduct a discourse analysis. Informed by feminist STS scholarship on marginalization, gender, and language, and the theoretical framework of social construction theory, I performed an ideological critique of the scholarship to articulate how language constructs reality, specifically gender, and the underlying consequences and assumptions. Care is given to recognizing other underrepresented communities and cultural rhetoric in digital communication tools to add a layer of nuance in highlighting the impact this approach can have toward uncovering social constructs and contributing to solutions that embrace diversity. I argue that the use of gender-based language in AI predictive text suggestions contributes to the social construction of gender in the creation, execution, and use of AIMC. I base this on knowing that gender bias exists in language and in artificial intelligence, thus the merging of the two into digitally enhanced communication predicts the prevalence of social construction of gender within these constructs. Additionally, given the relatively new stages of exploring the full potential of AIMC, I also argue that now is the time to recognize this concern in efforts to embed more neutralized language that represents gender multiplicity into AIMC to support a more inclusive experience for all. It is possible that AI technologies will be able to generate entire messages from the sender in synchronous communication, prompting the need to understand the role that AIMC plays in the development of interpersonal communications. Research supports that AIMC usually trends positive, with comments such as yes or sounds good, thus noting the influence it has on encouraging the dialogue and exchange of ideas between people. AI's ability to enhance positive communication can impact transparency and trustworthiness. Therefore, computer-generated dialogue with the input of the human has the potential to reshape language. Without the human element, personality characteristics such as empathy might dissolve in the evolution of language. It is also important to consider the role this can play in self-representation online, as well as personality judgments. Language has an important role in transmitting culture and forming norms and expectations. With this comes the prominence of gender and gender terminology to produce symbols that are socially constructed within a common knowledge of understanding. Looking at research on bias in the language society uses helps inform interventions to prevent language bias in new technologies. Even the words woman and human, both symbols and words used to identify the female body, contain the dominant male term man. This is one example of ways that gender characteristics are assigned to words, which are merely symbols of communication that have been adapted to cultural language expressions. Research finds that the English language contains more female value terms than male value terms. When considering the impact this has on social construction of gender, we must understand that gender is reflected and influenced in society through language, which is used to inform and educate. Therefore, gender biases in language can impact cultural understandings and communication practices. A study also argues that the language isn't necessarily biased, but that it does reflect cultural values regarding gender, which impose bias, supporting Judith Butler's theory that gender is socially constructed based on society's formation and assignment of gender terms. Social construction theory can also be applied to the connection between the individuality of text formation and conversations and the use of language in contributing to social performances. Additionally, research finds that gendered terms are assigned to perceptions of male and female personalities. For example, females are more commonly associated with characteristics of trust, anxiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion. And this is relevant because considering not only gendered language, but also gendered markers of personality traits informs users' possible gendered responses and actions. Lastly, it is important to consider how forced binaries of gender influence identity, and that one can only be if they conform to the constructs of acceptable identities. This thought emphasizes the power of social norms in allowing one to establish identities. Overall, the research on gender, as it is related to the English language, which is the default language of most AIMC, helps to consider the influences of biases and gender associations present in the language of the developers of AI, the users of AI, and the output of AIMC, and how that impacts societal interactions with languages and norms. When considering the histories and concerns with algorithmic bias, I want to look at the development of AI systems, and specifically Sophia Noble's idea that algorithmic oppression, which is essential in understanding the historic role of systemic bias. Historically, the first automated voices resembled a male voice rather than a female, thus marking another way of suppressing the female voice in AI system developments. Men were the dominant programmers, designing AI through a homogeneous, white, wealthy, masculine lens. This perspective led to outputs such as female characters taking the roles of virtual assistants, paralleling stereotypes of women in servant roles. Additionally, automatic gender recognition is used to place binary gendered ideals into outputs that can only be classified as male or female. Feminist scholars critique how these historical discriminatory acts amplify social inequality by referring to a binary form of gender as a physiological identity, erasing the experiences of marginalized groups, and thus resulting in systemic consequences. Giving algorithms the power to make judgments leads to not only reinforcing stereotypes, but also misjudging in a way that heightens social constructions based on the programming which exposes said constructions. These outputs reinforce the privileging and suppression of specific groups and voices. Understanding that algorithms contribute to constructed norms heightens the need to analyze the role AI plays in mediated communication regarding glorifying and suppressing genders to binary forms. It's important to understand that outputs of AI language are designed in a way that supports a desired perception, such as positivity, and how that might influence the creation of desired social perceptions, such as gender. In the creation and use of AIMC, keeping in mind the tendency to construct norms around acceptable language. For example, with methods such as tone policing, advancement should consider the impact of those actions on marginalized groups. Research calls for more inquiry into the ethical and social implications around the changes in language patterns and interpersonal perception regarding the use of AIMC. Concerns about these ethical and social outcomes can be related to Noble's concept of technological redlining, emphasizing the power of algorithms to oppress social relationships and form new ways of stereotyping. Another area of concern is understanding who is at fault when an AIMC conversation goes wrong due to the interchangeable role between human and artificial intelligence and this type of interpersonal dialogue. Given the emerging state of development of AIMC, the authors also highlight the implications of social construction in this technology. If text-based AI in English is trained on linguistic data from users whose demographics are strongly skewed towards a particular race, gender, and socioeconomic group, the system is likely to produce the discourse of that demographic. The kind of AI language may lead to the homogenizing of linguistic norms and the removal of crucial cultural variations in language. It could also prioritize certain racial and economic types of discourses, reinforcing systemic inequalities. Although the biases in algorithmic decision-making have received increased attention in the recent years, it is unclear how these biases will affect social dynamics of human communication at scale and over time, as well as in non-English contexts. The computers are social actors paradigm proposes that humans apply social characteristics to computers because human-to-computer interactions parallel social interactions. I looked at a 2019 study that considered participant responses to AI to observe levels of warmth, competence, and pleasure between AI that posed as a friend versus AI that posed as a servant. The findings suggest that users receive the friend AI as warmer and more pleasurable than the servant AI, and there was a positive relationship between the type of AI and anthropomorphism. Therefore, we can conclude that anthropomorphism plays a role in the AI-human relationship, supporting the idea that AI can be a social actor in the development of human relationships with AI. This is important when looking at the role of AIMC in interpersonal relationships and communication. Understanding that humans will assign human-like characteristics to their technologies blurs the lines between human-to-human interactions and computer-to-human interactions. Another study found that people assign gender stereotypes when minimal gender cues are available, suggesting that this could elicit stereotypic responses. This highlights the importance of understanding the implications of characterizing technology with gender. If humans inherently place gender stereotypes on objects, then gender bias can be expected in users' interaction using AIMC. If language is designed with gendered characteristics in language, this sets the user into automatically placing gendered expectations on the interactions. Without transparency, users are unaware if they are communicating with AI, thus gendered language could result in assumptions on the gender of the users in dialogue. If AIMC possesses gendered terms, the user can manipulate the responses to adhere to one gender expectation over another, leading to misrepresentation of the true self or inauthenticity to one's identity. Socially constructed gender norms, enhanced through the high frequency of digital communication practices society uses today, can have an impact on one's sense of self, given the role that gender terminology plays in constructing social expectations. Other forms of human relationships to computers can be highlighted in a study which finds discrepancies in the response to a position of authority from computerized voices, suggesting that the male authority is persuasive and the female authority is bossy. Additionally, participants had a greater acceptance of robots and the same gender over robots of different genders, and they also humanized robots of the same gender more. The findings support the human tendency to relate to genders that match the user and to be more likely to form negative associations with opposite genders. Considering the inherent human biases and expectations users have with computers allows researchers to understand the negative implications of AIMC could have in reinforcing social constructions of gender. Butler proposes that gender is socially constructed, which supports the idea that characterization of culturally established gender traits can lead to the replication of those gendered terms in the creation of AI language. This impacts the output of text suggestions, interactions with AI, and the role that the user has in interacting with AIMC in a way that is prompted to amplify socially constructed ideas of gender. Understanding these theories as they apply to language and AIMC helps inform future implications of gendered language as we consider stereotypes, child language development, and identity formation. Artificial intelligence will not be able to necessarily distinguish between social groups when suggesting responses via email or text exchange. Gender stereotypes will prompt users to adopt a specific social pattern and have varied behavior interpretations based on gender and interpersonal relationships. Therefore, outputs that are not authentic to the user could have unexpected consequences if the exchange resulted in a negative outcome based on the social group and dialogue. This brings questions about agency in this form of communication, where the influence of AI positions itself as a participant in the communication, and thus impacts the overall outcome of the communication. It is important to consider if historically gendered characteristics, such as trustworthiness, as it is positively attributed to females, might play a role in determining whether to build AI language that favors femininity in efforts to overcompensate for known skepticisms about AI language. If AI language is designed to reflect social constructions regarding gendered characteristics, we can expect that it not only will use gendered language, but that users will assign gendered characteristics to the use of the language, thus reinforcing gender constructs. Of particular interest is the role that AIMC plays in childhood language development. Given children's interactions with AIMC, care should be given to consider the impact that gendered language has on social constructs on the developing mind. Additionally, the significance of language as a tool for adolescents to use as they constantly negotiate the meaning of social interactions and relationship formations through their interactions with communities reinforces the power of linguistics in forming symbols of their identities. Intervention with gender multiplicity ideals in linguistics during early childhood could help shape a new norm around language. This could transform the future of social construction theory of gender to reduce the binary approach and embrace Butler's concept of undoing gender. Some may wonder why there is a need to consider the implications of social construction of gender in AIMC, since users can simply opt out of using the suggested text in efforts to engage in more authentic dialogue. Given the newness of this technology and historical trends of users opting into efficiency models of communication, it can be predicted that the use of this type of communication will increase. Research finds that 25% of the smart reply messages had no human language. While this is not the majority, it does represent a significant amount of fully creative smart replies, given the little amount of time users have been exposed to this technology. Research also finds that AIMC conversations included fewer words, making them more quantifiably efficient forms of communication. Additionally, regardless of user frequency, given the lack of transparency, users will never truly know if they are in dialogue with a computer or a human, which has implications on the development of relationship formation and communication practices. Research also finds that communication without the use of AI presented as more analytic and indicative of thinking patterns, highlighting that there is a difference in the quality of human versus computer interaction, a key factor in the human influence in building positive communicative experiences and relationships. Lastly, I argue that as a society, we must empathize with historically underrepresented groups by finding ways to discourage further oppression in as many ways as possible, especially in ways that are so intimate with our daily lived experiences. As society adopts more encompassing ideas of gender that go beyond binary constructions, AI creators have an important moral obligation to support a more inclusive society by prompting and assisting in this change to incite a more inclusive world. This progress forward also takes recognition and resistance against the current landscape of media ethics, which can be strategically used to develop AI, which further enforces hegemonic and patriarchal structures. Gendered language can be used to support the creation of stereotypes. Therefore, biased AIMC could have negative future implications on other stereotype developments, such as age, economic status, sexual orientation, and location. Advocates for removing stereotypes in technology can ignite change by undoing the ingrained biases within human and machines. Gender-fair language is a proposed social attempt at providing more neutral language. GFL suggests neutralizing language by removing gender altogether, as well as using feminization to balance the masculinity of language with the use of more feminine words, thus reducing the prevalence of male-dominated words. This approach would alleviate the overabundance of male-dominated words. However, this might eventually lead to an imbalance and/or focus too much on binary gender terminology. Neutralization seems like a better option to remove gender as much as possible from the language and approach a more all-encompassing linguistic that is framed using non-binary gender terms. AIMC needs to be created without gender terminology as much as possible, and with the automatic inclusion of gender-neutral terms when gender terms are suggested. For example, suggesting he, she, and they. For instance, what if AI language could prompt writers to use more neutral terms such as firefighter instead of fireman? Eventually, children would no longer be exposed to the gendered language, and it might be removed from the language altogether. However, it's also important to recognize that gender-neutral language still tends to lean toward the masculine. Attempts at neutralizing gender, such as Ms. to parallel Mr., are not adopted as norms historically, further contributing to a gender neutral that still leans toward the masculine. Additionally, when gender-neutral terms are introduced, such as firefighter, the neutral term often gets used to describe the woman, but the traditional male-dominated term remains in language to describe the man, such as fireman. It will take the inclusion of neutral language approaches and gender multiplicity ideals in all aspects of communication for a lasting impact. This emphasizes the need for AIMC to proactively engage with these efforts to prompt the development of language transformation in society. However, it's important that the consideration of gender constructs not be entirely centered around the use of language, but rather the interplay between language and reality, with a focus on social ontology. Keeping feminist thought at the forefront of this conversation is crucial to igniting a change between language and reality, and is especially foundational in the design and implementation of new technologies. Therefore, scholars must look beyond just the role that the language plays in building cultural practices around the use of digital communication to ignite change on a deeper level, leading to more progress. There is need for a focus on remediation by accounting for excluded groups rather than fairness, in efforts to build a more cohesive society that respects differences. Awareness is needed not only for those groups who are systemically disadvantaged, but also toward groups in authority positions, to better define boundaries that allow for representation in social and technical actors as it relates to AI in the field of computer science. Scholars call for an AI ethical structure that addresses the interconnected oppressive systems. Research does support that gender terms and cultural norms about gender can transition over time. This provides an opportunity for AI developers to consider how strategic planning to create more inclusive AIMC experiences could have a macro impact on the way society views gender and other identity characteristics, which can be supported by responsible execution and use of AI language in our culture. I am a firm believer that we must learn to live positively with technology. Therefore, I understand AIMC could most likely become a dominant mode of communication in the future. Turning to some of the positive benefits of this technology can help shape best practices. For example, AIMC could be helpful in detecting social cues that identify undesirable behaviors such as deception and negative emotions. AIMC might be able to mitigate biases if it can identify trustworthiness issues in the dialogue and then counteract those patterns in a way that offers a more neutralized experience than that which would generate from human biases. The broad outline of range of possibilities and challenges for AIMC helps with the specific inquiry into better understanding the impact that this technology might have in social construction of gender and in communication development. In developing a more inclusive approach, if the AIMC language is created to trend positive, might it also be developed to follow the trends of certain dialects and cultural responses and norms that suppress a certain group or overrepresent another group? What are the impacts of the groups that are not represented in this advancement in computer-generated dialogue? These questions must be considered as engineers continue to develop AI language and as researchers work to understand human interactions with AIMC. I believe in a world constructed under gender ideals, we are at a pivotal moment in considering how gender exists beyond the binary narrative. By finding ways to transform society and culture through common connective technologies such as AIMC to a place that is more all-encompassing of gender ideals that disrupt the traditional norm, we aim to arrive at a more accurate and authentic representation of gender and its complexities. In the words of Sarah Ahmed, I suggest that the objects we direct our attention toward reveal the direction we have taken in life, by prioritizing this concern in the redevelopment and future development of AI. Looking at the creation and use of AIMC through a feminist theory lens allows creative solutions to not only design a more inclusive platform for communication, but to also consider ways to better develop equitable outputs and engagements with artificial intelligence. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I appreciate it.